Welcome everyone. Today we have a great pleasure to talk with the science writer and the best-selling author, David Quammen. I don't think that David needs any introduction. He is a travel writer, a science writer, and author of many popular books, like The Song of Dodo and Spillover, and I'm quite sure that this one rings you some bells.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be with you.
Welcome.
David, thank you enjoy us and welcome. First question. What has been your first thought when you read the news about Wuhan in 2020?
My first thought when I heard the news from Wuhan was that this could be very, very serious. And the news that I heard, the crucial word that I heard or saw printed on January 13th, 2020, was coronavirus. That's the point when I thought this could be very serious. I had heard, like other people had heard, that there was a strange form of pneumonia putting people into the hospital in Wuhan, China. Maybe it was caused by a virus. Maybe it was transmissible from human to human. That's the sort of thing that you might hear often. It didn't raise alarm. But when I saw the word coronavirus in a technical report saying this new virus in Wuhan is a coronavirus, that was on January 13th, I thought this could be serious because coronaviruses are one of the groups of virus that have the ability to adapt quickly and to shift from their animal host into humans as a host. At that point, I knew that this could potentially be a pandemic.
Thank you. In Spillover Afterward, that I recently read, there is the president of EcoHealth Alliance that stated that they raised a flag for the last 15 years, but no one listened. Do you think that we are willing to listen now?
I hope we are going to listen now. We have to listen. As you said, Mirella, scientists had been warning for 15 years or more that a pandemic was coming, that it would be caused by a new virus, novel to humans, that it would be a virus of a form that has the capacity to evolve and adapt quickly to a new host, that it might well be a coronavirus. Those warnings were all out there for at least 15 years, and science was aware, public health was aware. Even political leaders had been made aware, but they did not have the imagination to spend the money and the political capital to be prepared to protect their populations and to protect the global human population. Now we have to listen. We've seen 6 million people have died. We have to prepare ourselves better for the next one. And I think we can. We have the scientific ability. We have the public health capacity. We need to spend money to be prepared to stop the next spillover before it becomes a pandemic. And we can do that with intensive surveillance and rigorous public health measures. We need the political will to do that. We need to not forget how painful this has been. But if we do that, if we talk to one another and we make the preparations that science indicates and that public health capacities make possible, then we can prevent the next spillover from becoming a pandemic.
In Spillover, you describe the relationship between Africa HIV outbreak and inequality. Mm-hmm. How important is the socioeconomic status when we talk about epidemics?
When we talk about epidemics, socioeconomic status, the disparities of wealth and poverty, the differences in the availability of healthcare, all of those factors are very, very important. We have not just a crisis of new viruses, we have a crisis of healthcare systems around the world. We have across the globe, we have one standard of healthcare for the wealthy and one standard of healthcare for the poor. Even in developed countries, such as mine, the United States, we have a great disparity of healthcare availability between the rich and the poor, or the affluent and the poor. And that is a serious problem. In the countries of Africa, some countries, low and middle income countries, their healthcare systems have been hindered because of lack of available resources and because of political instability. For instance, in 2014, the Ebola outbreaks in 3 West African countries, Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia, those outbreaks were made all the worse because of political instability, civil wars that had racked those poor nations and that had affected their ability to deliver healthcare. This is a terrible problem. It's one of the problems that we need to fix. The disparity between the affluent and the poor in healthcare availability not only affects the poor, which is terrible, but it affects everyone because these viruses spread. They don't care about rich or poor. They can infect everybody. They can kill everybody. And unless we stop these viruses as they tear through our underprivileged, less well-served communities of low-income people, unless we do that, these viruses will continue to evolve, be present, and will threaten everybody around the world. One scientist has told me an infectious disease anywhere on this planet now is essentially an infectious disease everywhere. We need healthcare, good healthcare for everyone to protect the human population on this planet.
Thank you. I think it's a tricky question.
Yeah.
So in our workshop that actually called Spillover, we use a planning method called backcasting. What do you think if we try to do the same? So we have today climate change, global health crisis, and infodemics. Start from the current circumstances. What do you think would be in 2032, so 10 years from now, the best and the worst scenario?
Well, each of those are important questions. They are interconnected. Climate change, the global health crisis, the infodemic, by which I assume you mean the epidemic of confusion, of misinformation, of obfuscation, of accusation. All of these are interlocked questions. First of all, climate change in 10 years. It is desperately important that we take serious measures to restrict the degree of the increase of climate change, the degree of carbon dioxide release and the other gases that cause climate change, trapping heat inside the atmosphere of planet Earth. We have known about this for 40 years, at least now. I can remember from the early 1980s, we called this the greenhouse effect, and then it eventually came to be called climate change. And very little has been done about it in 40 years. We still have too much consumption of fossil fuels. We have too many personal automobiles. We have too many airplanes flying around. We haven't converted to sustainable carbon-free energy sources yet. We need to do that. Countries need to enact serious legislation and firm international agreements to deal with climate change. Otherwise, in 10 years, it will be substantially worse than now, and we're already seeing impacts of climate change in the catastrophic weather events, flooding and hurricanes and tornadoes and things that we're having, the degree of temperature change that we've already seen. We're already now seeing impacts. If we wait 10 years before we get serious about this, then it will be I won't say it will be too late, but it'll be much, much harder to make the changes that are necessary. So we can't afford to wait 10 years. In terms of the global healthcare crisis, the risk of global infectious disease outbreaks, pandemics, between now and 10 years from now, I would hope that we will vastly strengthen our ability to conduct surveillance and response against spillovers and small outbreaks that introduce new dangerous viruses into the human population. I am optimistic that we can improve our ability to stop outbreaks, such as the outbreak that began in Wuhan, to stop them before they spread into global epidemics. I am optimistic about that because there are many things that we can do to improve that. And those are costly things, but we know now they're not nearly as costly as the cost of a pandemic. It might take tens of billions of dollars to prepare ourselves. But we've seen in the last 2.5 years that it costs economies around the world tens of trillions of dollars, a factor of 1,000 different, to deal with the effects of a pandemic on closing economies and closing schools and all of those impacts on our children. So I'm optimistic that we can do much better in 10 years. In terms of misinformation, the epidemic of misinformation, I don't know, frankly, how we deal with that. That is also a very, very serious problem. It's causing people not just to, some people to reject vaccines that are available to them against the COVID-19 disease, but to distrust science generally. And if the distrust of science continues because of misinformation spread like an pandemic virus, then it will be all the harder for us to do what I said we could do in terms of scientific readiness against the pandemic. So we do need to solve this problem of distrust of science by, I suppose, by continuing persistently to communicate with our fellow citizens about the importance of science, about real facts, about using critical thinking and real empirical information to judge what is and is not true about issues as important as this pandemic, for just one instance.
Thank you. So after all this view for the future, if you had to choose just 2 actions that we can undertake in climate change, on infodemic or global health crisis to improve the situation, which will be?
Well, I think with climate change, we need the sort of legislation that will shift people immediately or as quickly as possible simply away from fossil fuels. We need to make it more expensive to use fossil fuels than to use the alternatives. We need to make it more profitable to use the alternatives and to invest in the alternatives than to use fossil fuels. We need to change the economics of fossil fuels, and in order to do that, we need to change both international regulations and in each of our countries, national laws. We need to stop subsidizing and supporting and investing in the continued burning of fossil fuels, fracking for natural gas, petroleum, production of gasoline and jet fuel, and coal, God forbid, the burning of coal to make electricity. We need to eliminate the legal subsidies and arrangements that make it desirable for countries to continue to invest and for companies to continue and invest in that and shift to sustainable energy. But we need to make individual decisions too, all of us. It's not just saying, oh, we need to change the laws, the politicians need to be serious about this. All of us need to recognize that it's our responsibility too. The individual things that we do contribute to this. There are 8 billion of us on this planet. The individual decisions that we make, such as how many children to have, if we have children at all, how much we travel, particularly by airplane, flying around the world, and how much meat we eat, how much industrial scale animal husbandry we support as consumers. Those 3 things in particular have huge impacts on the amount of consumption that leads to climate change by each of us, and therefore collectively by the 8 billion humans in terms of a second act that we can do to deal, for instance, with the threat of pandemic disease, I believe that is to make the political choices to elect leaders who take science seriously. We need to get rid of the leaders who disparage science, who talk against science, who blur the realities of what science is, who appeal to people's most selfish, narrow-minded interests in disparaging what science recommends. And I would emphasize that embracing science, heeding the warnings of science about infectious disease preparedness, among other things, does not have to be seen as something that goes against our own selfish interests. In the long term, that serves the community of humankind, but also each of us individually better than ignoring science and rejecting vaccines. We are doing ourselves a favor, as well as our fellow citizens, fellow humans a favor, if we embrace science, support science as voters, support science as taxpayers, support science being taught in the schools to children. We need to do that for our own good in the long term, as well as the good of everyone else on the planet.
So thanks again for this interview to join us. It will be a great pleasure to talk with you today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mirella and Sergio. A pleasure to talk with you. Grazie mille.